Okay, we still have people coming in, so just wait another few seconds. Okay, aloha mai kako. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's very special Next Steps Train the Trainer workshop on flood salvage and recovery. And our speakers today are Liane Naʻauao, who is the paper conservator at the UH Manoa Library Preservation Department, and Malia van Heukelem, who is the art and architecture librarian and heads the Charlot collection at the UH Manoa Library. And she formerly worked in the preservation department at UH Manoa Library. So to maximize the amount of time they have to talk, that's all the introduction I'm going to do, and please take it away, Malia and Liane.
Thanks, Gwen. For those of you that don't know us already, I'm Malia and this is Liane. And we pulled this together very quickly and it's going to be live action, so bear with us. We've been trying to figure out what to do to support our community over the last several weeks of flooding that has gone all down the state. We know that many of you have been directly affected, whether it's personal things that have been damaged or your libraries. And we all know friends and families that have been impacted. So what we're going to do today is focus on books, papers, and photos. There are so many more things that people need help with. And we'll be happy to direct people to other resources. Just let us know what you need help with after the presentation.
Can I butt in for a second and say that the link to the handouts is in the chat?
Great, thanks for that. Why am I frozen? Sorry, everybody. So we're going to walk through book salvage, but before we do that, we got to address a little bit of health and safety, because when there's an emergency that happens, the immediate inclination is to run in and grab stuff, but you do need to take care of yourself. And so if you're going into a place that has floodwaters and mud, you're going to want to boot up and cover your skin, wear work gloves. There might be sharp objects as you're pulling things out. What we're talking about today is more for future events, because we recognize that so much time has passed already that things are either dried out or they may have mold. One of the things I wanted to talk about is that we were reaching out and trying to figure out where we could either do demonstrations or go to like the Community Assistance Center out at Waialua last Thursday, and people just weren't ready. And I've been pushing out emails and sharing resources, but people were still dealing with basic needs. And, you know, thinking about libraries, and right then I got a message back from Ellen Ricachola who said, let us know if HLA can help. So I really want to thank Ellen and Gwen for just having our back and partnering with us on this to get the word out for this and future water emergencies. So I think that's what I wanted to say about the beginning. Now that so as you're responding, you really need to prioritize, and if it is muddy, and right now we're talking about flood salvage, so we're assuming there's some mud. If there's just the air conditioning or a roof leak, you still need to consider, is there asbestos or lead paint? You know, do I need to protect myself from the materials? But with floodwaters, you always want to assume the worst. It can have animal waste, human waste, chemicals, all kinds of stuff can get in there. So we did get a couple of things soaking wet, just for the full effect. And different things are treated differently. So with the books, you're gonna wanna do a quick assessment after you make sure it's safe to do so. What are you gonna prioritize to save? So if you only have a couple of things, then everyone should know how to just dry a book. But if you have a whole bunch of stuff and not a lot of hands to help and not a lot of drying space, it's really best to consider, can I replace this? Is it something that is a rare book? Does it have an inscription? Is there a reason we need this particular copy? Is it out of print? And the more that you can make quick decisions about what really needs to be saved, don't worry about the other things, because you really need to be able to working within the first 48 hours, or things start to get mold, or they start to block up if they're wet, or have coated papers. Those turn into glue, just like photographs. So I have two books that are really soaking wet. They've been soaking all morning. One is a paperback. The assumption is these have been in floodwater. So if you have access to running water, preferably outdoors, a hose, you want to hold the text block so that the book remains closed. The book covers will help to protect the interior. And if you really need this book and the cover is lost, you can recase it. You're gonna see some colors that bleed. You're gonna sort your books into different groups of things that are just damp, things that are wet, and things that are soaking wet. So the ones that are soaking wet right now, I have some paper towels and some blotter paper. Now, not everybody's gonna have blotter, but if you do, that's great. You can use old t-shirts. The tips that we're giving you are just do the best that you can. After you've rinsed it off, you can blot it. And this one, because it's so soaking wet, it's not gonna wanna have the pages fan out just yet. And so you're gonna gently open the cover when it's ready to do so. And you can put the blotter in the inside covers because that's where it's soaking up the water. And just blot it. I can see the green ink is already bleeding. Now the soft cover book, there's no way that's gonna stand on its own right now. So that one can go in between just a book holder to start draining that out. You can keep rotating these until they start to dry on all sides, and eventually they're gonna start to dry out. But this one's been soaking and the inside text block is not wet at all. It's just on the edges. So it depends how fast you get to them. For the other item, you would just stand them up. And if they're just damp, again, you're gonna let them dry out and you can keep flipping them and let the pages naturally open up. You're gonna have a fan, and you're not gonna blow the fan directly on the materials. You're gonna have the fans circulating the air around the room so that things are drying, but they're drying kind of evenly. If you blow it directly on it, pages can be fragile, and it also will cause some uneven drying. So for pamphlets, this one is nice regular paper. You can just put it over a clothesline or something, and that helps it to fan out. Same thing with other coated paper booklets. You want to make sure that the coated papers are not touching each other, because it's gonna just work like a glue. And so those all have to be fanned out so they're not touching. Same thing for magazines. If you run out of space and you don't have access to something to hang it on, you can do drying with interleaving, and same thing for the books. If they have coated papers, like you'll find this with a lot of art books, that they'll have some of the glossy paper, those photos will get stuck together. So you would only do this if it's a really precious item, because you need a lot of interleaving and then you need a lot of drying space. And if it's really soaking wet, you're going to have to replace those. So if you have not enough time and too many things that need to be dried all at once, freezing is going to be your best bet, because freezing buys you time. And in order to freeze materials, we just have a box for support. And unlike the other kind of freezing we do in libraries, we're going to put the bag on the inside of the box, because if you put wet books in a cardboard box, the whole thing is going to just collapse while you're trying to move it. So because we have things that are paper. Thank you. So wax paper or butcher paper, some sort of thing to make a sling. So this is a really soaked book. And if we put them all in the box together without separation sheets, they're gonna stick together and be harder to separate when you're trying to take them out and drying. So the thing to remember with freezing books is one layer spine down. And so you want to put them in all edge to edge, fill the box so that they're not slumping, because they're gonna come out in a really funny shape. So the more that you can compress that, because right now they're all swollen from being wet. Resist the temptation to start putting books on the top, because you have all this extra space, because the books that are not constrained are gonna twist and turn. If the books are too big, like if you have some folio, you're gonna wanna stack them with the largest book on the bottom. And then just stack them all in a row and seal it up and get them in the freezer. What that does is say you have 10 boxes of wet books, then you can take out one box at a time, let it start to thaw, and then proceed with just drying them. I think I covered what I want. Get out about books. I'm gonna turn it over to Liane. And we'll have time for questions at the end.
So yeah, Malia, thank you very much for covering the books. So I'm going to be just talking about the loose papers and photographs. So like Malia mentioned, it's very important to like prioritize as much as you can, because once you're going into a collection and you don't know how much water has gone through everything, you don't know if you're going to have enough space for everything. And you really want to focus on your important things as soon as possible. So with regards to important papers, like in the library and museum collection, that can be like primary source documents, the historical records, maps, architectural drawings, art on paper, handwritten researcher notes, and anything that hasn't been digitized yet. So those are all things that you might consider irreplaceable, and probably want to prioritize over things that maybe do have copies of already, or you can get copies elsewhere. In a personal collection, so at home, you might be considering your vital records, so like birth certificates, social security cards, things that you need to like verify your identity if you need to ask for disaster assistance. So just kind of knowing beforehand, like where your important papers are, whether you have digital copies that you can access. And if you don't, like, these are definite things that you want to focus on. And as far as paper, what's nice that you saw with the books that Malia showed you, that paper is very absorbent, so you could see how much water it sucked up. And also, but what's nice, they have these book covers, right? So that keeps all the paper together. Depending on how long they're soaking, the water sometimes doesn't even infiltrate all the way through the text block. But when you're working with just like paper, like it tears easily, and there's nothing to support it. So let me just put this in the bucket. So paper gets very weakened when it's wet. All of the hydrogen bonds get disrupted, so they're very susceptible to distortion and tearing. Yeah, so what's really helpful is if you have something to support the paper. So say you have like just, I'm not sure if you can see, but this tray is has water in it, and we have a bunch of paper objects in it. So like when I lifted that newspaper and I just kind of like pulled it out, it tore down the middle, and there's no support, so things are going to break off. And that's really, really sad. That's not what you want for your important documents, right? And so what we're thinking about is just making sure that they have a little bit of support. And so some things that we use in the library are remade, which is like a spun-bond polyester, or we use just polyester sheets. And these can be useful, and when you're trying to like peel the different papers apart from each other. But at home, I'm sure most people don't just have these hanging around, so you could use wax paper if you have it, or even like if you have a gallon Ziploc bag that you could cut down to size. And these are different ways that you can use to support the paper. So it's just a plastic bag, and I'm putting it on top of this top layer. And I'm going to just pull up a burner, and as long as you move kind of slowly and you can kind of like separate a piece off like that, then you can move them. But like Malia said, we're just demonstrating with non-affected items. And so if you can, to rinse off some mud, any mud, so that you're not bringing it into your workstation would be the most ideal thing. But if you're trying to go through all of your papers and see what is important, if you have folders and things like this that you need to separate them from, or if you have framed art, or if you have encapsulated pieces, like you might not have this in your library, but you know, just like something that's been encapsulated in Mylar. Like, unfortunately, water will get into your frame eventually, or it can, and it can get into your encapsulation also, especially if you use the double-sided tape. And so when the paper is swelling, it has nowhere to go. It's very restricted, and it'll start to cockle and distort in your frame or in your encapsulation. So those need to be dismantled before you start drying them, or else they can get moldy and they stay in there because they won't dry. But if your encapsulation holds because you use like heat welding or something, then you could probably just rinse this off. But yeah, but for loose papers that you're going through, so this, we also have a folder in here. But the folder, you might want to take it out of the folder. But then there's information. Sure, we can see like sometimes we have like a label at the top, and that you might want to cut or tear and keep it with the paper so that you don't lose any textual information that is with it. Yeah.
Our camera moving side to side,
Or
or is it just us?
No, you're not, the image is not moving.
Okay, I think it shows up. All right. Just as you're separating these, like Malia had a towel set up, and she kind of books take up a lot of room, but paper can take up even more. You imagine like a stack of papers, because we're gonna dry them all flat and just so we can imagine you have one folder with 10 pages. It's going to take up a lot of room. And that's why we're saying to like prioritize the important papers, because you're going to run out of room pretty fast, probably. Of course, these are clean. The other thing we do is if they're very muddy, even after you rinse off any excess mud on the outside, we have 3 trays set up here. They're not all full of water, but what you can do is successive baths. And so you can have your object in the water and use a soft brush. One of these or one of these, and you just kind of brush off the mud if possible. Don't scrub too hard because yes, the paper fibers are very soft right now. So you don't want to like break them while they're in here. But if you could just use the water and like brush any of the mud off. And then if you need to do both sides, you can kind of just get over. And then we'll take this off. And then you can float your object. You can get this back underneath. That's not floating. But, and then you can do the other side. And then if you have another bath, you do it here, and then a third bath. So the water will get very dirty in the first one, and then a little bit less in every one. But it's like giving them 3 baths. Then you can dry them. But if you don't have a lot of bags or wax paper, and you do need to reuse them, you might want to flip them over and just peel from a corner. And then you can reuse it for the next item. So it depends on how many people you have to help you and how much space you have to dry. So, and like Malia said, you would have a fan on, but also not blowing directly at the object because of course it'll blow all your papers around after it's after they get dry. Another thing we can use, we have these screens in our lab. And they're custom made for our drying rack, but this is a really nice way to dry things also because the air can flow from the back, and so the front and the back both dry at the same time, so it dries a lot faster. But I would suggest like don't think about really using your home ones unless they're clean, because I don't know about your screens at home, mine are only clean at New Year's. So yeah, but if you do have screens, it kind of helps to dry them a little faster.
Yeah, I think also, you know, the screens are so big that if you only have a narrow table, you're able to
Extend
kind
the
of
space.
make more drying space.
So, yeah, that's basically drying. But as you can see, it's gonna take up a lot of space over time. So, do your important papers first, and then if you, don't have the space to work on the rest of the stuff, then you would, oh, it has a staple in it. Then you would, freeze them, possible. And that would be, first of all, you secure a freezer if you can. You can put it in your own freezer, you know, if you have just a pile that'll fit in a Ziploc bag. You could just put them in a Ziploc bag, and this might fit in your freezer if you have electricity. So it extends the time a little bit. Also, if you have inks that are soluble, I forgot to mention, if you know, there's a lot of handwritten documents you want to check, because if the inks are soluble, you might want to put them directly into the freezer, because you want to just arrest that the ink from running right away. But that, yeah, can be put in a Ziploc bag if you don't have access to like a big chest freezer or something to put them in. And if you have the supplies and time, you could interleave with the remake, with the spun polyester. But also, if you don't have time and supplies, you're just doing what you can. So just packing them for later, and then when you have more time, take out the bag and thaw it and separate and dry. So yeah. And our papers. And when you, after you're washing, you can drain off some of the water. I don't know if you can see it, but. And so photographs, that's probably the thing that a lot of us hold very a lot of sentimental value with our photographs and our photo albums at home. And those are really important things you want to save, because it captures all the memories. And photographs, if you have like the old like longs type of envelope, and it came with your negatives and your prints, and you never put the prints in the photo album, and you still have the negatives, you might just want to focus on the negatives, because the prints will take up a lot more space, and you could reprint from the negatives. All of the things that have been through a flood are not going to be the same. Fortunately, you can wash them and remove the mud, but likely it'll never be pristine again. And so with photographs, the same. So if you can save the negative over the print and reprint from that, that's probably going to be a little easier, time-wise and space-wise and supply-wise. Photographs are composite materials, so they're similar to paper, but there's the image layer, right? So this is all emulsion, and it's on a paper back. They're sometimes on metal, and they're sometimes on glass, but the composite material makes it more complicated, right? So the emulsion it swells and it gets very soft. And the paper, as we know, is going to get very swollen as well, and it'll also be susceptible to tearing. So we always handle the photographs by the edges, and that's true when they're dry as well, but also when they're wet, you really don't want to smear the emulsion because it's so soft that you'll tear it easily. So handling by the edges. Negatives, also they have the little sprockets, right? And so the sprockets you want to handle just by them. These negatives, I've never had negatives come back to me like this, but they have like a plastic jacket on it and a little paper thing. And so I would guess that paper thing is gonna, if it was wet, would just disintegrate, but you want to take that plastic off just to make sure that your negative can dry. And then if you have photo albums, then you want to address taking those parts also. Just take this one out. So if you have old school photo albums, the magnetic type, that is adhesive backing and then a plastic on top. you're gonna need to dismantle this. You're gonna take the plastic off so that it won't keep the moisture in there and it won't cause mold to grow. Some of these adhesive backings fail in that the photographs just fall off and then, oh, well, then you don't have to take them off. And some of them fail the other way where you can't ever get them off. This one is like partially off because these aren't wet, but I would just say leave them on if they're going to stay on, because if you try and lift it off, you probably tear either the paper back or the emulsion. Yeah, and then this one also has captions on it. So like if you can keep that with your images too, so then we would actually just dry this as a sheet as one thing. Also, plastic sleeves. And so these you want to definitely, like encapsulation, you might want to cut them out because they're not going to dry in the plastic. And if mud and stuff gets in there, you can't really wash them. And sometimes these also have captions. And what you'll need to do is just make sure that the caption stays with the photograph. So I know that becomes like a very complicated thing, but that's the thing about photo albums, that is they're different from every household, from every album to the next album, right?
Yeah.
They're very precious that way.
And the reason you wanna cut them out instead of trying to pull them out of the plastic pocket is because that emulsion layer might
Tear. Yeah.
it
Wipe
might
right off.
It can turn back into a gel form. It'll slip off, so you wanna cut it off and just peel it out of the plastic.
And of course, I've been doing this all without my gloves on. Apologies, but ours are clean. But yeah, like with the books too, and the papers and the photographs, if there's mud involved, better to protect yourself. But we also usually use gloves with photographs anyway too sometimes. So we have, so this envelope totally apart. And this is, oh yeah, this is the negative. So materials. Okay. These, if they're sticking to each other, you can, sometimes water will help them separate, but see if I get this on. Just gonna get away. Actually, this one, the plastic, that was the jacket for the negative. What came off. And so you do want to peel that away, because it's not going to dry the jacket. And so it is holding on to the edges. Are they really, really protecting this negative? And you can also, if you have a micro spatula, you can kind of use this too. Double sides, right? Screw. Just get a corner up. There you go. Right. And putting on to the edges. So the negatives are also emulsion on one side, but plastic on the other. So it could be cellulose nitrate or acetate or polyester. So it's in a way a little bit sturdier than paper, but still. So because it has both sides and we want to save some space, we can actually hang the solution. and hang them from the corner. For a negative, you would want to do it where the sprockets are, so that's not gonna damage the emulsion at all. And then you kind of have it at an angle so that it hurts. And with a photograph. Some of these you can just handle, because they're a little bit on the smaller side. You can probably handle them. You may be able to just handle them in your hand and not use a support. This photograph. I want to make sure you're using non-metal paper clips. And this print has a border on it, so we don't have to worry too much about impeding on the emulsion. But if you don't have a border, you might want to pick the corner that's the most inconspicuous and use that side to cut. So here I have like a stack of photographs, and I'm just trying to use the water to cut. These are pretty small, so I'm just gonna use my hand. But move those corners. Maybe of course, I set this all up and it's dripping all of the things on the bottom, so don't do that. But for demonstration purposes, yeah. Or you can put, if you have another, towel you can put in between. But so photographs can also take up a lot of room, like, because you can already see like there's a stack of photographs in here. And it's nice if you can have the clothesline because you can hang a lot more than if they are drying flat. But if you can't get to them all, or your rack is full, then you might want to consider freezing these as well. If you can, put wax paper in between. So we had suggested remade for regular paper, but remade has a texture to it that you might leave impressions on the emulsion. So if you need to use some wax paper, and this is actually at least something that you can get at the store. Did I miss anything?
I think we should open up for questions. So I guess one of the things is, thanks for bearing with me while we're trying to sort all this through, but this is not a disaster planning workshop, and encourage all libraries to have a disaster plan and practice it, because there's nothing like handling the stuff yourself and learning how to support it and getting your setup, thinking about your supplies. But sometimes you just need to do what needs to be done. And so that's where emergency response comes in, and you do the best you can with what's available and improvise. So practical solutions. And do we have questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet, but if anybody has any questions, you can either put it into the chat or you can unmute and ask it. So while we're waiting, I have a question. Are there any suggestions about where people could find freezer space if they don't at their institution have sufficient freezer space? Are there places where you can rent space in a freezer or rent freezers or something like that?
So we are in the enviable position of having a walk-in freezer at Hamilton Library after the flood. But prior to that, you would want to, if possible, figure out some freezer space before you have an event like this and have agreements set up. There are like some freezer truck companies. Is that in the pocket response plan, Liane?
And ours, yes.
So I have an old copy of our library's pocket plan. Unicold. So there are some local vendors. Belfour is a global disaster recovery company, Matson Navigation, Pacific Cold Storage. Maybe they're not around anymore. My plan is old. So if you do have a plan, you do need to check it and update it every 6 months to a year because things change. And but you can also look to community because as we've seen happening, it's really community that is in the line of fires and this most recent statewide disaster. It's community that comes together to support each other. And we saw that with the 2011 floods that happened with the Japan earthquake and tsunami that flooded the basement at Heukelem Palace, and our former preservation department head, Lynn Davis, worked with them, and they ended up getting Kona ice because it's a huge fishing area. They have this ice facility for all the fishermen, and they were honored to be able to support cultural collections recovery of kahili and kapa. So if people are able to help and all the power's not out, there's a lot of what ifs. And so much of this, you have to do it on the fly. I think there was a question that came in.
Yeah, Alex asked, would the steps be any different for fabric book covers?
Fabric? No, we're dealing with some of these are fabric, some of them are like sturdy buckram. I mean, buckram is like one of the toughest things around. That's built for library books to be checked out all the time. The paper covers are quite fragile. Like once paper is wet and it doesn't shed water, it'll absorb it. And if you brush on it or wipe it, it's gonna pile up. Cloth covers, I mean, leather is another issue. Leather is not gonna do well in water and mud. And so you want to get that off as quickly as possible. Same thing with fabric, because the fabric, if it's not buckram fabric with like coatings to make it super resilient, it's gonna absorb, I'm thinking of like Japanese covers where it has like the nice silk fabrics. It's just gonna want to grab all the mud and stuff. So to try and get it off as soon as possible, but if it isn't washing off, you're gonna end up trying to dry clean things after they've dried out, after they've been frozen or dry.
You can try, but like I said, like when anytime it's gone through a disaster like that, we can't expect it to go back to its previous life. It's been forever changed, unfortunately. Yeah. Do you want to talk at all about
well, just while we're on the books, while other questions are coming in. One thing is after they're all dry, the bindings will get distorted. You just expect that, especially if you've interleaved them. Sometimes that'll really expand things. You can try to flatten them out by stacking them maybe 4 or 5 high with the largest ones at the bottom and putting weights on top. You want to have something that's going to distribute the weight You can use a board, you can use bricks that are wrapped with old t-shirts or butcher paper, you have it. There are so many other things that can get wet, like cassette tapes, especially 80s cassette tapes.
Or VHS tapes.
So if you trying to save the information that goes with it, if it's been through a flood, you're gonna want to rinse it out. If it looks like it's easy to open, you can try to open up, or you can dry it so all the water flows out. Same thing with VHS, beta, different kind of magnetic media. One of the most problematic is microfilm. If you have irreplaceable microfilm, really need to have a plan for that because it's about the most time sensitive thing. There's no longer a local facility to handle that, and they have to run it through a machine and clean and dry the whole length of the reel. And so there are, it depends whether it's Fuji or Kodak.
Neither of them do disaster recovery.
They don't,
Just
yeah, so
but
so
they're
few places.
yeah.
It's really sad. You do.
They're kind of like planning ahead and knowing, like knowing your collection and knowing if this went through a disaster, like what would I do next and who would I contact?
Yeah, so always if you can prioritize in advance, knowing what are the most important things and where you need to focus your initial energy, because even, you know, whether it's your home or whether it's at a library or museum, if it's more than just like a roof leak that's an isolated event, you're probably not going to be able to save everything. So you want to quickly be able to make those decisions and focus your energy.
I think that's great. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I don't see any more questions, but I was wondering, I remember that when we were working with FEMA after our 2004 flood here, we had to do a lot of photo documentation of the treatment that was
That's
given
right.
to things. So can you talk a little bit about that?
We forgot to mention that. Yeah, very important. Because like we mentioned, like a lot of these are probably not going to look the same as they were before and might lose them if they get moldy. You might not be able to recover them, but very useful to go in with photo documentation in mind. So nowadays, like cell phones are really helpful. They take pretty good pictures. And so I bought this waterproof case for mine so that when I'm going into places where I don't know how dirty something is, like when I went to Lahaina, and stuff like that, it's like, at least it's protected. So it has a little window for my camera and everything. But I've used this to document things. You can document them as soon as you like realize this is my birth certificate or something, and like just take a picture. After you wash it, you can take another picture. What's hard is that sometimes if it's obscured by mud, you can't tell even what it is, but it doesn't hurt to photo document when you're going into the scene, just what the space looks like. Because that's usually helpful for like insurance purposes as well.
So there's different kind of, documenting is critical to being able to recover. So whether it's for insurance purposes or whether it's individual items, you're going to need it for reports. You're going to need it for insurance. Sometimes, sadly, if things grow mold after you've cleaned them, but they didn't dry out, having that surrogate, then you can go print another one, the digital file. So photos are really important, and then you got to worry about having chargers available and power and all that. also tracking things. So in a large disaster, you have more than one box of books to put in freezers, or if you're using people's personal freezers and you have to separate out collections, you want to keep a record of where you're sending stuff, and you're gonna, if possible, mark the boxes so that when you go back to them, which ones are the priority to deal with first. If you end up freezing a lot of things, I recommend focus on the photos for recovery before the books and papers. They don't do well left in freezers for years. We learned that with the Manoa flood, and yeah, I mean, in such a massive scale disaster, there are commercial recovery companies that can do vacuum freeze drying, but that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. That would be part of a future disaster preparedness and planning workshop, maybe with hands-on wet salvage, so that you can all experience this for yourself. But we hope that we've given you enough that you feel like you could do something like this at your own library, and yeah, practicing your plan, getting your list together, and figuring out what kind of supplies you might need. So if you can in advance, it makes it a lot easier. But we all have to do the best that we can.
Okay, well, mahalo nui loa for your wonderful presentation and for all the time that you have spent preparing this. We do have time for one last question. If anybody else has something that came up and that you haven't seen addressed yet.
I have a question. Hi, folks. This is Ellen. I wanted to ask, where did you buy your supplies from? All your things that you have, is it locally viable?
Well, yeah, we're lucky that we have a lot of these supplies on hand. But like for some of the things like I use wax paper, and even just a plastic bag if you're trying to separate the papers, towels, these are just things you might have at home to use. If you're like working on your personal collections and things like that.
A lot of this stuff you can get at hardware stores. We tried to keep it to be just what a homeowner could do. The few things I think that you would have to order for a library recovery would be remade and big sheets of mylar, the polyfilm.
And then if you're doing dry cleaning, the soap sponges are a really good option for dry cleaning to get the mud or mold.
But those can be sourced.
But these can be
locally,
done
right?
locally,
Yeah.
yeah.
So mostly stuff that we have, except for the ever useful microspatula.
Yeah, the white background.
But yeah, the white background is not helpful. But anyway, the archivists out there will know what a microspatula is. You got to order those. I don't know anyone locally. The blotter paper, really useful to have. We had a ton in preservation and would use it to dry maps after they're washed, and we reuse them over and over again, and then when the dyes would bleed out of it, we would cut out the bad parts and just keep the rest for, if you have a window leak and you need to throw some blotter paper down on the floor, it's super absorbent and doesn't take a lot of space. That, I think you can get it. Maybe Wine Graphics or maybe the bookstore, not sure. It's expensive though.
And then so if you want to do like the successive baths, like you don't have to have photo trays.
Oh, yeah.
You could use buckets. You could have 3 successive buckets, as long as there's the water, and you just have to be able to get your object in there. Or, those disposable foil trays that you can get at the supermarket too, can
Yeah.
also work as long as they're big enough for your outfit to fit in. Else-
And the gloves and the goggles and, some of the stuff we can get at UH bookstore, you can get it at the big home improvement stores have a lot of the stuff. I mean, we're all now know what N95 masks are. We used to have to explain that. We don't anymore. And the gloves, we prefer nitrile gloves, but you can use any kind of gloves that are gonna just protect skin contact. And when you remove the gloves, you wanna take them off inside out and then dispose of them so that they're sort of encapsulated in itself and you get rid of that. So that you're not doing any cross contamination. And always, wash your hands all the time.
Don't eat where you're doing the recovery.
Yeah, don't eat where you're doing disasters. But make sure that you are eating and drinking lots of water and taking breaks because there's a tendency to just go, go, go. And if you pass out, you're no good anyway.
Yeah, that maybe a message would be, don't worry, don't feel guilty because you can't do it all. You can only do so much, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with these massive disasters, there's always people looking to place blame. And I truly, from being on some of the front lines, I do believe that everybody is doing the best they can and that we all just need to do what we can to try to work towards recovery. It is amazing to see communities come together and support each other.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and for all of the time and effort that you put into putting it together and figuring out how to stage it for us. So mahalo, and I am sure that if people have additional questions, they can probably contact you offline to if they have follow-up questions. So this is recorded, so it will be put up on the HLA YouTube page or YouTube site in a few days. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.